Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. We have much to report on today. Wow, a very busy Monday, December 4th. A lot going on. Surprise, surprise, in the world's most volatile and chaotic region. We're going to break down what is happening in the Middle East right now and how it affects you, no matter where you live. So let's start. Let's get into it. Number one, Israel's offensive in Gaza is expanding in a major way, folks. Look, that truce was called off essentially on Friday, not formally called off verbally, but through its actions. Hamas did exactly that on Friday, firing a barrage of rockets at Israel. That's number one. And secondly, really the day before, we said on Thursday, November 30th, that, to my mind, was the real end of that mini truce, in that Hamas terrorists launched a terror attack in Jerusalem, murdering at least 4 Israelis, wounding several more. And Hamas, again, claimed responsibility. That was on Thursday, the 30th. Then the following day, Hamas unleashes a rocket barrage, and so much for that 7-day ceasefire. In the very least, dozens of Israeli hostages were freed. But now the offensive, the goal, the initiative to crush Hamas decisively once and for all, has certainly reconvened, and the IDF now pounding the remaining pockets of Hamas resistance in northern Gaza and around the Gaza City area. But also, we have reportedly hundreds of IDF tanks rolling into southern Gaza, meaning in particular they will target Khan Yunis and Rafah, and there have been hundreds of Israeli airstrikes over the past few days, in particular in those areas. Now, Khan Yunis, folks, remember, that is really the stronghold of Hamas's leadership, according to the IDF. You think of the most wanted man right now, Yahya Sinwar. He's the leader of Hamas's operations in Gaza. He is most likely in Khan Yunis along with his top deputies. And there is, just as there was in Gaza City, or is in Gaza City, of course, an extensive tunnel network beneath Khan Yunis as well. So efforts are ramping up there. According to the IDF, there is fierce fighting, and I quote, according to the IDF chief of staff, fierce fighting occurring and unfolding right now as I come to you in southern Gaza. Now, Israel said all along that this war against Hamas would eventually expand to the south. They believe that the North is mostly pacified at this point. Pacified might be a strong word. As I mentioned at the top, there is still some pretty heavy resistance in different areas of northern Gaza, but by and large, folks, Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza, and that's pretty clear. And now things move to central Gaza, and again, southern Gaza is the major target right now of the IDF. And it makes perfect sense if you have the likes of Yahya Sinwar based there, who is really the butcher of Gaza. Some have called him the bin Laden of Gaza. And number one, mastermind of October 7th was Yahya Sinwar. But secondly, remember Mohammed Deif. Now, we have mentioned this name many times here on the Watchmen over the years, really the head of all of Hamas's military operations. You could say they're 1-2 in terms of who is most wanted by Israel, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif. And they quite possibly are together, or at least in close proximity to each other, beneath Khan Yunis right now. We will see very soon, because Israeli intelligence reportedly is pulling out all the stops to locate Yahya Sinwar. Now, if he is eliminated, what do you think, folks? I'd like to get your take on it. What does that shorten the war? If Yahya Sinwar, obviously huge symbolism to his elimination, but how much is he involved in the day-to-day? Is he directing this entire operation, this Hamas war? Was he involved? It seems that he was involved, as a matter of fact, in calling some of the shots when it came to the hostage release last week. So if Sinwar is eliminated, what does that do to the length of this war? Could it shorten the war? Could it hurt morale among Hamas? And you have to imagine right now that morale is already pretty low. Again, Israel, I believe, has gone above and beyond what the likes of Yahya Sinwar and Hamas expected in the wake of October 7th. Look, Hamas knew Israel would respond, but the resolve shown by Israel and the unity amongst really all facets of Israeli society has really been stunning, considering that over the past year, much of Israel was at each other's throats in terms of political disunity, protest in the streets, etc. And now the unity is really a sight to behold. I don't know that Hamas anticipated that, number one. And secondly, I don't know that Hamas anticipated. I think they thought, yes, there would be in the wake of October 7th. I mean, come on. This is one of the most deadliest terror attacks, not only in Israeli history, but in modern history writ large. 1,200 Israelis slaughtered. So Hamas, southern Israel quite literally invaded and ravaged by at least 3,000 Hamas terrorists. Thousands of rockets on that very same day also fired. So, look, Hamas, Sinwar, they knew there would be a very strong IDF response. But did they think it was going to be something similar to 2014, where there was a more limited ground incursion by the IDF? Look, Israel has always been very concerned, and with good reason, about IDF soldiers being killed in these operations. Did Hamas wager that, look, they don't want casualties, and also wager that, look, they're too divided to have any kind of cohesive response when they carried out October 7th? Because obviously the response has been quite the opposite. It has been a devastating and lethal response, and rightfully so, by the IDF. And Hamas also was counting on international pressure, which has always been Hamas's calling card at the end of the day. It's trump card, I guess you would say. International pressure to get Israel to agree to, most of the time, a premature ceasefire when the job's not done. Different story this time. We documented on the newscast over the past 2 weeks that we were concerned that as this truce extended, and again, it lasted about a week, that the international pressure would mount, and it would get to the point where the so-called international community would say, Israel, you must impose a lasting ceasefire. And that would have left Hamas to fight another day, essentially. It would have been disaster on many levels. Thankfully, Israel said, no way. And look, folks, as we documented on Friday's live stream, by the way, if you missed any of our newscasts, just check it out here in our archives under newscast. They're all right there. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We are fast approaching, hard to believe, 1 million subscribers. And that's for two reasons. God Almighty, number one. And secondly, our loyal and very well-educated and highly informed Watchman viewers who we appreciate greatly. And I'm just looking right now at our very active chat from around the world. We've got thousands with us. We'll have thousands more before we're done. But what a pleasure and what a joy to come to our incredible Watchman viewers and subscribers on a daily basis. It's fun. Not fun subject matter, but it's always, maybe fun's not the right word, but it's always edifying when you're with a very well-educated, in-the-know audience. And wow, do I respect our viewers. And if you look at our chat, you can see why. Some great takes. So things are intensifying big time in Gaza, and Israel's closing in. I guess that's the best way you could describe it. The Israel Defense Forces are closing in around Hamas. Is Hamas saving some of its biggest barrages for last? Meaning, when its back is really against the wall and they know that the cord is about to be cut completely and they're about to meet their demise, and that they are no longer going to be able to function as a terror entity, a terror army, essentially. What does Hamas have something in reserve? I know that's been a concern for many. Look, today, just before I came to you, we learned that there were more Hamas rocket barrages targeting central Israel near Tel Aviv, sirens going off in Tel Aviv, and also Beersheba in the south, another large Israeli city. Of course, there are still some barrages hitting the communities like Sderot, Nir Oz, etc., that are around the Gaza, along that Israel-Gaza border. But folks, those communities in southern Israel, sadly, have largely been just empty and evacuated since October 7th. In the meantime, And look, we've got some things to discuss today. Again, big weekend, big news day today out of the region. We want to discuss Hezbollah momentarily, but the Houthis, I mean, folks, this is becoming a main topic of conversation here in the newscast. They are really ramping up their activity in the Red Sea to the point where the U.S. and Israel cannot, I believe, ignore it anymore. There's got to be a response. Will there be a response? We'll see, but there should be a response. We want to talk about that. Also, a very significant airstrike in Syria over the weekend carried out by Israel reportedly, in which two members of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds force were killed. And when Iranian they're not foot soldiers. When you're talking Quds force, you're talking their elite. But when Iranian operatives, that would be the word we'd like to use, of that magnitude are taken out, then Iran usually plots some sort of response. So we shall see, but we'll talk about that as well. And we got to talk with Hanukkah upon us. Look, December 7th, this Thursday, we've got to talk about some of the very, very troubling activity right here in the United States where I'm sitting, and also in Europe. Folks, Hanukkah celebrations being canceled, and any show of a Star of David or any sign of Hanukkah being canceled by some U.S. towns for fear, and that's the operative word, fear of anti-Semitic terror attacks. This is in the United States of America this is happening. Europe, of course. Look, Israel just issued another travel warning to Jews traveling in Western Europe. I mean, folks, we are in times right now, Bible times, prophetic times, but we're in times that have not been seen for the Jewish people since World War II. No doubt. The anti-Semitism we're seeing now, and I heard someone argue the other day that it's perhaps worse today in that it's global. Look, the anti-Semitism in the 1930s, early 40s, obviously, was laser focused in Germany and parts of Europe. And of course, in the Middle East as well, there were pogroms. But now it is truly global. In every corner of the world, from Australia to the United States, Europe, Asia, Latin America, etc., we're seeing explosions of anti-Semitism. So this is unprecedented in many ways. And we're going to talk about that as well in the larger implications. And hey, you know what? Prophetic implications there as well, where God Almighty was very clear that the Jewish people and the world's one and only Jewish state would be increasingly targeted in the latter days. The good news about that is that Israel has, I don't know, a pretty powerful friend in the form of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So don't fret. And again, in case you haven't noticed, this is news, but from a Christian perspective here on the Watchman, proudly and unapologetically. Speaking of which, let's get you up to speed on the situation in the north before we move on to the Houthis, etc. Real quick, you need to know that Hezbollah observed, if you could call it that, the truce and held its fire for about 7 days from the north on that second front on the Lebanon-Israel border. That all changed. Once the truce was out the window over the weekend, we saw once again Hezbollah firing missiles, anti-tank missiles, and mortars at towns, which, again, are largely evacuated in northern Israel as well. Not only at towns, but targeting Israeli soldiers. And at least 3 Israeli soldiers were wounded in a Hezbollah barrage yesterday coming out of the north. Now, Israel, this has been tit for tat ever since October 7th in the north. Israel responded yet again and apparently pounded a pretty significant Hezbollah weapons depot in southern Lebanon, along with some other Hezbollah military and terror infrastructure there. And hey, that's all great. And look, Hezbollah has lost, I'm hearing now reports of over 100 fighters since October 7th. Pretty significant chunk of losses for Hezbollah. But nonetheless, again, this demands a response, a more robust, significant response. These Hezbollah, I can't say incursions because they haven't, thank God, had a ground incursion yet, although clearly that's the concern. And we quoted a report from our friends at the Alma Research and Education Center. They're based in northern Israel. That is their focus. Last week, they said, look, Hezbollah right now is capable of sending a few hundred fighters over the Lebanon border into northern Israel and attempting to duplicate October 7th. That's right now in real time. So we haven't had that incursion, would mean that on the ground, but what we have had are these frequent barrages. And I don't know that Israel can, for much longer, they're not standing by and allowing it. Israel is striking back, as I outlined for you, but there may have to be a more significant response in the short term. Why do I say in the short term? Because in the long term, Israel has made very clear they're going to deal with the threat to the north. Israeli military officials have said over the past few weeks that they are going to change the security situation in southern Lebanon, meaning, in the very least, Israel, when the dust settles, if it settles, in Gaza and Hamas is crushed, Israel is going to turn its attention to the north, as well it should. Now, there's an argument to be made that Israel right now should be turning its attention to the north. But Israel, number one, does not want to fight on two fronts. And secondly, the United States. Relentless pressure from the Biden administration to not go all in southern Lebanon. Israel eventually, folks, is going to have to deal with Hezbollah. It is unsustainable to have a terror army that makes Hamas look like child's play. Hezbollah is magnitudes more powerful than Hamas, and we saw what Hamas did on October 7th. Hezbollah has far greater capabilities than that. Some 150,000, it's got to be more at this point, rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. The tens of thousands of well-trained foot soldiers, battle-hardened, battle-tested from the wars in Syria. The intent, as outlined by Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, to invade Israel in the north. He was talking about October 7th style attacks in the Galilee long before October 7th actually happened. Bottom line, Israel and Hezbollah are on a collision course. And in the very least, Israel is going to have to push Hezbollah back beyond the Litani River, create a very significant buffer zone in southern Lebanon, near the Israel border. But what Israel ultimately needs to do, in my view, is crush Hezbollah. And that's a much larger task than crushing Hamas, which is a large task in and of itself. Israel knows that. That's why Israel has tried to avoid going all in on that second front. But eventually there's going to be a day of reckoning. We've called it here in the newscast the Great Northern War, in which Israel will have no choice but to face off against Hezbollah, the Iranian regime, their various jihadist allies, not only in Lebanon, but also in Syria, which brings us to the events of yesterday. Israel reportedly carried out airstrikes in Syria around Damascus. And when we talk about Damascus, we'll get the comments here in the chat, I know. And we're talking about prophetic implications, Isaiah 17. Again and again, every time we have a new strike, and we've had many in and around Damascus, in particular, many times targeting the Damascus International Airport area for good reason, because the Iranian regime continues to attempt to transit advanced weapons through that very airport into the hands of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Israel says, no way, that's a red line. We're not going to allow it, nor should they. But two, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force members killed in this latest strike around Damascus over the weekend. And Iran was open about it. Iran said they were martyred in Syria. Will we see a response from the Iranian regime? Now, Iran's MO in terms of response is obviously acting through proxy. So we shall see what comes out of Syria, out of Lebanon, and out of Yemen as well in terms of any sort of Iranian response. Again, when Iran loses members of the Quds Force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, that is considered their elite. That's the vanguard of the regime, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Look, I've compared them to a modern-day incarnation of the Nazi SS. They answered directly to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. They essentially control Iran's nuclear program. They control Iran's economy. They're in charge of domestic surveillance. They have their hand in everything. Again, these are the shock troops, the elite vanguard of the Iranian regime. So when two of them are killed, the regime feels it. Something to watch. Because when we talk about a great northern war, we're not just talking about Lebanon. We're talking about that entire northern front, Lebanon and Syria, obviously side by side. And what Iran wants to do in Syria is duplicate what it's established in southern Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah. Look, a terror army, well armed to the teeth, perched on Israel's border. Israel says, no way, complete non-starter. We won't allow it. Again, collision course. So Lebanon, Syria on the verge of heating up. They've been heating up. I should say on the verge of heating up in a major way. That front, that second front, that northern front, hey, it's open. It's not open all the way, and it's certainly open more than a crack, but it's been open since October 7th. There have been daily tit-for-tat kind of exchanges between the IDF and Hezbollah. And, hey, those Israeli airstrikes in Syria continue. So that front's open. What about the South? Let's shift to the South. I do want to mention, though, before we do that, I meant to mention this at the top. This should get your attention because it involves a NATO member nation. Although under the radical rule of Recep Erdogan, I refer to Turkey as NINO, NATO in name only. Erdogan making more noise, who has come out as an unabashed ally of Hamas during this war. Erdogan said today that Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal. He called him the butcher of Gaza, and I quote, and said that he should be put on trial, a war crimes trial. Not only that, I mean, so basically, in case you hadn't noticed, relations between Israel and Turkey are completely out the window at this point. There was some rapprochement and a coming back together gradually before this war, and Erdogan was desperate because the Turkish economy has been in the tank and inflation there has been through the roof. So all of a sudden, good old Erdogan was putting on a charm offensive, including with Egypt, the Gulf states, and Israel, trying to get back in their good graces for purely economic reasons. Because Turkey, he felt isolated, he felt economically marginalized, and again, inflation through the roof. But that's all out the window now, because you can't, if you're a true ideologue, which Erdogan is, the most anti-Semitic, anti-Israel world leader this side of the Iranian regime, you can only wear that mask for so long before the mask falls off and the ideologue comes out in full view. And this was certainly the Hamas war, a trigger for Erdogan. He has staked his reputation and staked his claim on being a support of the Hamas resistance. And he calls them resistance fighters, freedom fighters in Erdogan's word. Mujahideen, he used that term, holy warriors fighting for the liberation of their land. This is a NATO member nation leader, folks. But today, the Turks are also saying, Israel, don't you dare carry out any assassinations on Turkish soil. What do I mean by that? Well, the head of the Shin Bet, Israeli Internal Security Service, audio has surfaced in Middle Eastern media of him saying that, look, we are going to target Hamas leaders around the world, no matter where they are. He said that includes Turkey, that includes Lebanon, that includes Qatar. We know right now that a good chunk of the top Hamas brass, you know, those billionaires, these guys are rolling in dough while their people are starving and living under the jackboot of Hamas terrorists in Gaza. But I digress. People like Khaled Mashal, Ismail Haniyeh, who are in Qatar right now, people like Musa Abu Marzouk, Saleh al-Aruri, these top Hamas masterminds, all wearing suits and designer suits and well-fed, staying in luxury hotels with large bank accounts. How'd they get that money? It's interesting because, I don't know, billions of dollars have poured into Gaza over the past several decades. I wonder where it went. The same place the billions that poured into the Palestinian territories under the rule of Yasser Arafat went. In Arafat's case, it was in Swiss bank accounts, apparently. But the Hamas leaders, they're doing pretty well. They're living the high life, but maybe not for long, because the IDF, again, or Israeli officials from the very top, Benjamin Netanyahu has said no Hamas leader is safe. Some have certainly transited through Turkey. Turkey has provided Hamas support. I'm not saying they're arming Hamas. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that there have been Hamas terrorists living in Turkey. And people like Saleh al-Aruri, a top Hamas leader, he was living in Turkey for several years there. But the Turks are saying, don't you dare, don't ever act here on Turkish soil. Stay tuned. Because I think ultimately, I think back to the Munich massacre in the 1972 Munich Olympics, those terrorists, eventually Israel tracked them down and dealt out justice to them. So these Hamas leaders, the architects of this demonic death cult known as Hamas, modern day Nazis, eventually I believe Israel will pursue them. And let's just say it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I want to mention the Houthis real quick. Now, yesterday, Sunday, that was December 3rd, there were at least 4 attacks in the Red Sea, 3 against just commercial vessels passing through the Red Sea, and 1 against the USS Carney. That's a U.S. Navy destroyer that's been in the Red Sea. These attacks were launched from Yemen by those Iran-backed Houthi rebels. And this follows a string of attacks that we've documented here in the newscast since October 7th. Rockets, missiles, and attack drones launched in the direction of Israel by the Houthis. Thankfully, they've all been shot down by either Israel or that U.S. destroyer I just mentioned in the Red Sea. But also, things have intensified over the past week and a half as these Houthi rebels have hijacked at least 1 commercial vessel, and they attempted to hijack another, but U.S. forces stopped them. Now, all of these vessels that are being targeted in the Red Sea have at least indirect links to Israel. Maybe there's one of the owners is Jewish or has Israeli background. That's how the Houthis are looking at it. And they're vowing to continue to harass shipping in the Red Sea and launch rockets and drones at Israel as long as the Gaza war continues. Now, folks, this is untenable. Look, the U.S. is there. U.S. destroyer, which has been targeted by these Houthi attacks, unsustainable, untenable for Israel and the U.S. These directs clearly, and the U.S. officials are saying this, confirming these Houthi attacks are being directed by the Iranian regime. So when will the U.S. respond in some meaningful fashion against not only the Houthis, but yes, the Iranian regime? Well, we've been asking the latter for a long time, but I don't know that Israel for too much longer will sit by and just allow the Houthis to launch rockets and missiles and attack drones to their pleasure in the direction of the state of Israel. Now, that would be opening a third front. We talked about the first 2 fronts. That would be a third front. This is all, remember, a ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides, whether it is Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza, whether it is Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, those Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen. Iran has successfully, the head of the snake resides in Tehran, and Iran has successfully ensnared Israel. I don't want to say ensnared, but encircled, let's say that, encircled Israel with terror proxies armed to the teeth with rockets, missiles, and attack drones. And Israel now is in the process of breaking one ring of that ring of fire. And quick question, I'd love to get your thoughts on this before we move on to some more pressing news from right here in my backyard. If Hamas is truly on the ropes and Israel's about to deal that death blow, is that the point where Iran activates that entire ring of fire, in particular Hezbollah? Has Iran been holding Hezbollah in reserve only to unleash it when the time is right in this war? Is this war going to expand? Or are Iran and Hezbollah willing to watch Hamas and Islamic Jihad, their invaluable proxies in Gaza, be destroyed? Are Hezbollah and Iran willing to step back and allow that to happen? Or do they see Gaza as too valuable to their goals to let it just go by the wayside and fall under Israeli control or international control, or however a post-war Gaza is going to look. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Please leave your comments here. I love our very active chat and our great comments here on the channel. Hey, last thing we got to mention, and this is pressing. I mentioned Hanukkah this Thursday, December 7th. By the way, I am hosting, quick programming note, a Hanukkah special on TBN. You can also watch on the TBN app on Thursday, December 7th, airing 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a Hanukkah special featuring our good friend Rabbi Jason Sobel, Dennis Prager, Danny the Digger Herman, Zev Orenstein of the City of David, many others, recounting the story of the Maccabees, Judah the Hammer, and the heroic Maccabees, the incredible, miraculous Hanukkah story, and why it's still relevant today. We've got some on-the-ground content from Israel, from Modin, the hometown of the Maccabees. This is going to be a very, very cool special. And as Christians, why should we care about Hanukkah? The Gospel of John says that Jesus observed Hanukkah. He went up to Jerusalem to do exactly that. So check this out. Thursday night, December 7th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on TBN and the TBN app. But as TBN is upon us, but as Hanukkah is also upon us, we have reports of Hanukkah celebrations and symbols, Jewish symbols and Hanukkah symbols being taken down or being canceled in towns across the United States. Now, I don't know how widespread this is. I've seen at least 3 reports, including one in Virginia. But folks, this is alarming. They are caving. They are concerned about the threats from pro-Hamas mobs that we've seen descending on several cities across the United States and Western Europe since October 7th. And they're caving. That's one part of it. The second part to keep an eye on, Denmark. This is a sign of the times in Western Europe. Denmark now, there are armed Danish troops surrounding, protecting Jewish sites in Denmark. And then we have that warning I mentioned by the Israeli government earlier in this live stream that, look, any Israelis traveling to places like Britain, France, Germany must be very careful. Jews have actually been encouraged in Western Europe to not wear Jewish symbols. I would argue that in New York City, it's dangerous right now to wear a yarmulke, a kippot, or other symbols of Jewishness for a Jewish person in New York City. And I'm sad to say that. As a proud American who's worked a bunch in New York City, filmed up there a lot, it's a sad, I think sad's an understatement. It's an alarming time in the United States, no doubt. Which brings me to my hometown, the town of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. I'm a Philly boy, as you all know, if you watch this newscast on a regular basis. I love my hometown. It helped make me who I am. But over the weekend, I saw something at a restaurant called Goldie's, a great falafel shop in downtown Philadelphia. Again, an anti-Semitic mob surrounded this falafel shop, which is owned by Michael Solomonov, who's an incredible chef, Israeli and Israeli-American. He owns a lot of great Jewish and Israeli restaurants in Philly. And one of his restaurants was surrounded by these anti-Semitic mob accusing Goldie's, a falafel shop, of genocide just because it sells Jewish-themed food and is owned by an Israeli-American. Now, the White House even came out and condemned this as anti-Semitism. The governor of Pennsylvania did the same. But folks, that's where we're at. This is where we're at. We're now, if you're just a Jewish guy owning a falafel shop, your shop's going to be surrounded and you're going to be menaced and intimidated and harassed. This is where we're at in major American cities right now. It's really happening. We say never again. Throughout the years, the rallying cry has been never again, never again. Well, as some have said, never again is now. So for me as a follower of Jesus, yes, a follower of a Jewish rabbi, and his followers called him rabbi, a Jewish rabbi from the Galilee region of the Jewish state of Israel. That's who I am. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus. I take this personal. And I think as the body of Christ, as the church, it's time to speak up and to speak out and to stand up with Israel and the Jewish people for such a time as this. Look, you can tell who your true friends are when the times get tough and the going gets rough. That's where Israel and the Jewish people are right now. So I'm going to continue with my platform to get the truth out and to stand strong and to really utilize this platform that God Almighty has given me, again, for such a time as this. We will not remain silent. That's why we say, never hold your peace. Isaiah 62:6. Many have asked, what does never hold your peace mean? Go and read Isaiah 62:6. That's your homework for tonight, and I'll be back with you tomorrow. Until then, thanks so much for joining us. Keep praying. It works. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for